Vice-Rector Björn, and I'm really happy to welcome you all to our Higher Education Roundtable on Micro-Credentials and Student Engagement. This session is divided into two parts, so that at first we will have three excellent keynote speakers talking about micro-credentials. After each presentation, we will have some time to take questions from the audience. You can leave your questions to the Q&A box. And if you see on a Q&A box a question you like, you can support it and that way help it to rise to the discussion. Comments and discussion with other members of the audience, you may write straight to the chat box. Our moderator, Oskar Nyman, will read both boxes and help me to pick questions and comments to the discussion. The second part today consists of a panel of students led by our specialist in academic affairs, Joni Kajander, from our student union, and they will discuss on student engagement. In more detail, they will bring into discussion ways to recognize the involvement in organization in the form of credits. They will also think of ways how to foster student participation in several activities within universities. Our EC2U Alliance also has a specific task group called Micro-Credentials, and I'm very proud to be the leader of this innovative group. Its work has already started, and we are currently collecting information on the current situation on micro-credentials in each partner university. It is also planned that the micro-credentials will be a small part of the EC2U joint master's programs. This way, we will be able to provide interesting and needed information to everyone in our campuses and even cities. We are expecting to contribute by offering those micro-credentials as soon as possible. We also will contribute to the ongoing European level discussion on micro-credentials by creating a position paper for the Open EU platform by the end of the summer. But what is the European approach to micro-credentials for lifelong learning and employability? To the theme, we are first led into policy officer Klara Engles-Perenyi from the European Commission. She is working on the development of European approach to micro-credentials. In her presentation, she will tell us about the current state of consultations and explain the European Commission's further planning on this initiative. Klara, you are very warmly welcome, and we will now start showing your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure for me being with you, at least virtually today. And for us, it's also a pleasure to see that your alliance is interested in offering micro-credentials and exploring this rather new domain of provision. Although, as you will see from my presentation, it's not that new, but the name is certainly new, and this will help us to develop further on practices. Our work in defining a European approach to micro-credentials is a joint initiative between two European commissioners, Maria Gabriel. On the next slide, you can see them. Maria Gabriel, who is a commissioner for education, youth, sports and culture, and Nicholas Schmidt, who is Commissioner for Jobs and Social Affairs. And micro-credentials are also embedded in key European policy documents, starting from the European Skills Agenda, but also in the area of education and training. We have a paper defining our main deliverables in the next 4 years, more or less, until 2025, and micro-credentials have a key role in there as well, just like in the Digital Education Action Plan. So we have a lot of political backup from the side of the Commission, and we also see that the topic is high on the agenda of policymakers at national level in the meantime. And next slide, please. Where does this big interest come from for micro-credentials? This is not something which was created top down, but this is really a reaction on developments in the needs of learners and also the needs of the society. We see that learners are more and more interested in shorter bits of provision, mainly for this is certainly valid for those who have already left their formal education and training, graduated, and would like to or would need to retrain, upskill or reskill, and they don't necessarily want to go for a full qualification again, but smaller, more targeted provision and bits of skills. And we also see that the COVID-19 crisis left many people unemployed, especially the youth is very, very hardly hit by this process, and for that micro-credentials, shorter courses leading to a tangible certification could provide help to find their places. And there are already a lot of so-called micro-credentials, micro-masters, etc. on the market, very, very often provided by private companies and private platforms, while we think that universities are also very, very well placed to enter into this field. And the current situation is really intransparent because nobody really understands what we mean with micro-credentials, what are the key features of it, and what is needed for institutions to offer these. And the students are also uncertain about their usefulness for their career, for their pathway, while micro-credentials can be a very useful tool, not only for upskilling and reskilling, but also for current students who would like to enrich their curricula, their programs they are following with other shorter courses from other domains, for example. And these questions regarding the quality, recognition, and transparency, and also portability of micro-credentials have led to the decision that the European Commission will also look into this topic, and this topic is on the work program of the European Commission for this year. So by the end of this year, we will present a proposal for Council recommendations, which is more or less the strongest means of legislation what the European Commission has in the area of education. On the next slide, you can see these again. What are the key aspects we are looking at? We are trying to set European standards for quality and transparency of micro-credentials, and see how the storage and sharing of micro-credentials could be supported by European tools. And on the next slide, you can see that we started this work already last year, where we discussed with the representatives from very different domains, but related to higher education. And we published a report which in December, which forms the starting point for the discussions for this year. The next slide, you can see the definition which this group formulated. And this is a draft definition. So it is, we are still looking for feedback from the society, from private learners and also from organizations to improve this definition. And what we are trying to say here, that a micro-credential is actually the certification what you receive after a short learning experience. We are less directly using terms which are used in higher education because we were asked to develop this initiative not only for higher education but for the entire education and training domain, including non-formal and informal learning. While we think that most micro-credentials will be based on the on a course which learners follow, we would not like to exclude the possibility that somebody gets a certification after the assessment of skills and competencies which he or she acquired through other means and not through a formal course. And this is reflected in the bold part of the definition. So the very important words are the learning outcomes, probably, because this means that at the end of the learning process, there will be an assessment whether certain learning outcomes have been reached and whether the certificate can showcase this. And this certificate would be a document. We expect a digital document in most cases, which would display the learning outcomes, but also some other information about this credential, which is important for the evaluation by another higher education institution, whether learners can use it as to replace some parts of programs they are following at that institution, or it can be also used by the employer, the potential employer, to see what skills the learner or the applicant has. And it's very important to have all this transparent information on micro-credentials within this hopefully digital credential. And another key aspect is that these credentials would be owned by the learner. That means that the learner has them in a wallet, in a digital wallet, and can decide individually with whom to share this micro-credential, depending on the needs. So while degrees, your diploma is more owned by the institution, and you get the diploma at the end with the diploma supplement giving information. Micro-credentials would be more directly stored in the wallet of the learner. And another element which is very, very useful for learners in our view, that they can be combined or can be stacked into a larger credential, and who knows, probably even for a full qualification, although it is also very, very important to stress that the first learning experience of a first full degree is something which higher education institution can provide best, and building full degrees only and exclusively by the learner is still something which is often doubted by stakeholders, and without any guidance of higher education institutions, if it's a micro-credential in higher education domain, the full stack ability is not really the first step which will be made most probably. But this is also something we are consulting about. So the stackability is one of the questions which is commented the most probably. And the very, very important aspect is a very thorough quality assurance, which in our view in higher education goes without saying that accredited higher education institutions are provide good quality of education, but they would also have to ensure that their internal quality assurance measures refer also to micro-credentials and the courses leading to these credentials. On the next slide, you can see that we discussed these different elements, what would be needed to issue micro-credentials. And if we go further, then you will also see that micro-credentials is not only about the very technical topic. On the next slide, you see that that we have discussed, or we are discussing also other enablers for having micro-credentials in place in the different countries, and we are expecting also to provide the stakeholders, countries and higher education institutions with incentives to stimulate the uptake of micro-credentials. And the European Universities Alliances are, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the most important players testing this new method. And we can go further, please. Yes, so as I mentioned already, micro-credentials can be obtained in different settings, and this is what makes it, I think, very interesting also for European Universities Alliances, because you are testing as an alliance, you are testing a lot of different ways of cooperation between students and staff from the different partners, and micro-credentials could offer a way to acknowledge this and to certify that, and we think this is something really worth thinking about for an alliance. And it also enables universities to work together with other players, with web providers, private companies, even chambers of commerce, and involve players from the environment as well. On the next slide, you can see a number of examples of micro-credentials. You can find them on platforms. You can in Italy there is even a micro-credential piloted by the Academic Recognition Center, and the other European Universities Alliances, like EC2U was from the very beginning very active in this domain, but we are very happy to see more alliances interested in this. So they are to be found scattered at the moment in different domains, and hopefully this work we are doing at European level will help learners to find them more easily, and also to understand better what the key features of good micro-credentials are. And finally, I mentioned that we are preparing a council recommendation. In my last slide, you can or sorry, it's not it's almost the last. You can see the timeline. So we are consulting at the moment, and December will be most probably the date when they are when we present this proposal. And on the last slide, you can see a little bit more that we are consulting widely, and there is also a link to this open public consultation to which I invite you all to react. Also, as an individual, you can fill it in, because individuals will receive different questions than organizations, probably less complex ones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Klara. The timing was just perfect. Please stay on the line just for a second. You can even put on your camera. Now, Oscar, do we have some questions or comments from the audience?
Actually, yeah, one just came in. Antonella Forlino asks about, can you comment on the rules of the recognition of micro-credential among institutions and organizations?
Yes, the recognition is a very complex issue, because that it has different elements. So once the quality of the micro-credential is ensured by the evaluators, the credential evaluators, then they usually look at what is the content of the learning and the learning outcomes, which goes through this procedure of recognition of prior learning. And this procedure at the moment is really time consuming and also very resource intensive for institutions, but also for the learner presenting the evidence of this. So we are looking into ways together with the recognition centers to make it a little bit more automatic, to have a kind of a color code to the different dimensions of micro-credentials, which would help the evaluators to see whether these credentials are really trustworthy and whether they fit with the course content the learner wants to use them for.
Thank you so much for your answer. And also I want to use my opportunity to comment that it was really nice to hear that European Commission's approach to micro-credentials is really well in line with the majority of universities. We really don't want to see micro-credentials as in the sense of high stackability. We want to perceive them as enriching parts of degrees, as you also referred to, and that's how we intend to create and use them also within the EC2U Alliance. I was really happy to hear this, but I understand that this is a subject that might induce really multiple types of opinions and approaches. Thank you very much. And actually now it's time to move on. As you noticed, we have a great artist, Blanche Ellis, with us, and she illustrates what the speakers are saying. You will be able to see her drawings after the forum on the EC2U website and social media posts. But now we slowly go ahead and invite Ms. Jonna Korhonen, Senior Ministerial Advisor from the Ministry of Education and Culture in Finland, to give her speech. Jonna works at the Higher Education Development Unit, where her responsibilities include European and national higher education policy development, especially linked to the implementation of the Vision 2030, that includes the changing learning environments and digitalization. In addition, she is a part of the Microball project, in which she is leading the working group on qualifications frameworks and ECTS. Actually, Jonna also holds a Master of Science degree in Geography from the University of Turku. And she has told us that she has very warm memories from our university. Please, Jonna, you can now start with your topic, promoting continuous learning through micro-credentials. Warmly welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to this event. I wanted to actually share my presentation, but I do not seem to find the button. So maybe you can share it for me, and I will just let you know when I want to change the slide. But while you are looking for the presentation, I can already start to speak about the micro-credentials. So I'm approaching the subject from the perspective of continuous learning, which is another word in English, lifelong learning, but in Finland we call it continuous learning, as we try to put more emphasis on the systemic and systematic approach to achieve lifelong learning paths right from the childhood through the secondary level education to higher education and beyond. Next slide, please. We already heard a presentation by Klara from the Commission, so I'm trying to move in between already what has been said. But I mean, the basic question when we approach the issue of micro-credentials, also at the national level in Finland, when we have been discussing this topic, is that whether this is actually a new concept, or is it just something that is new packaged in a new kind of packet. So it's an emerging topic at the national and European level, highly discussed in Finland, but also in other countries in Europe, based on the discussion we had within the working group of the Commission, but also within the European higher education area and within the Micropole project that was mentioned before. It's linked to the changing labour market needs, re- and upskilling, urgent need to find new ways to skill and find new skills and competencies when the world changes around us. There is no clear definition yet, but it's clear that everyone is looking for some kind of definition. I heard 2 days ago in one of our working group meeting, we want to have a definition that is flexible enough, but on the other hand, we want to have limits. So how to balance this kind of wish is a question that we need to find an answer together. In Finland, we are talking about, in our translation, more about the small learning units, not about micro-credentials. It is difficult to translate, which also tells a bit more about our approach to the topic. So we are more looking into the actual learning, the learning experiences, the knowledge, skills, and competencies that can be acquired through these small learning experiences than really about the certification. And this is a crucial difference between, because when we talk about the micro-credentials, we can actually end up talking about two different things when we don't really recognize that it involves two different kind of issues. What is also clear based on our discussion at the national level is that it's not seen as something that will replace the degrees or formal qualifications. It's something that will just complete them. It can be standalone. It can be standalone small learning units, or it can be part of degree. And when we talk about something that is part of degree, it's easier. It's easier to talk about micro-credentials in context of building degrees, building something that is part of the formal degree-leading education. But when we go a bit beyond that, the discussion gets always a bit more complicated. Next slide, please. So I already referred to you about this discussion about the definition. At the moment, we are working on with two definitions. The other one is proposed by the Commission in this, which Klara already presented to you. And the other one is proposed within the European higher education area, the Micropole project that also takes forward the discussion about the micro-credentials and formulating a European framework for that, for the higher education area. Of course, in general, the feedback has been that, in the end, we would like to have a definition that is compatible at the general level, and then we can maybe contextualize it a bit more into different education sectors and providers. So, no one actually wishes to have two different definitions for the higher education sector, for example. Next slide, please. So in the Finnish context, the discussion actually has started quite quickly in relation to the continuous learning. We have at the moment taking place a huge parliamentary reform of continuous learning that looks into the ways how to actually support the skills and competence development from the lifelong learning perspective, maybe putting more emphasis at the moment on the adult learning and adult education, but actually, looking into the whole education path, starting from the childhood education. So when we discuss about this topic, we have organized some national events to discuss with the wider public and also within the smaller entities within the different kind of working groups. What is seen that the micro-credentials actually can be the answer to have a more accessible learning opportunities for diverse learners with various needs. We have to see that the diversity of learners is increasing. We need to upskill and reskill the already working population. We need to see that the elder people have the skills and competencies needed to thrive in more digitalized world. We need to see that the young people who are entering the labor market are also getting the skills and competencies they need. And in this respect, when we talk about flexibility, but we also talk about openness. And openness in terms of learning provision. So micro-credentials could also seen as a way to open up learning provision. And here the example of the European universities is a very good one, because here, universities are doing cooperation together to open up learning provision together to cater to more diversity of needs. What I wanted to put here is that in the Finnish context, we at least see that the micro-credentials are something from the higher education perspective that is before, during, and after higher education leading to a degree. So we are not talking only about the degree leading education, but also education that can, for example, micro-credentials can be the first steps to higher education, having something that is more reachable, more accessible, when applying to the degree might be seen, sometimes too difficult to do at once. They can also be as something that, makes us easier to tailor the learner path for the diversity of learners, also by using digitalization and artificial intelligence in our support and tool. It will empower the learners to learn by supporting motivation, to have the feeling of succeeding in learning, having more confidence and learning to learn skills. One of the challenges is that, lifelong learning is something that takes place whole life. And, when you don't learn, you might actually forget how to learn. So, micro-credentials can also be seen as a way to keep up, these skills to learn. It will also ease the combination of learning and working, as they are smaller units than degrees. And it might actually also support the modularization of higher education. Next slide, please. What I wanted to hear, I have so many different things I could have talked about, but I decided to talk about the kind of the added value, the new aspects in relation to micro-credentials, what is emerging when we look into different kind of developments in different countries. And is that what I have noticed is that it actually might create new opportunities for new kind of forms of collaboration. And this means collaboration within the sector, within the higher education, within higher education institutions at the national level, but also internationally. And the European universities is, of course, very clear example of that. But it also can support the collaboration between the sectors. So for example, the higher education sector and the secondary level education sector, having a smoothen the path of the learners to access the higher education. It also can support the collaboration in terms of using shared digital platforms. And here we often see the examples of MOOCs, for example. And one I always say is from France is the Fun MOOC, where the higher education institutions cooperate together to have a shared learning provision and to certify digitally to learners when needed. Of course, at the national level, we also have these kind of developments. But I mean, this is the collaboration that can also happen, but it also requires changes in the way how we work and how we do the learning provision. Another aspect is the cooperation with employers, and this actually came out quite strongly in our national discussion a few weeks ago. It was seen that the microcredentials actually can be the way how to actually respond quickly to the changing needs of the labor market in cooperation with the employers and the higher education institutions. And there was also one interesting aspect: what is the role of higher education institutions in evidencing and certifying the learning that actually has taken place in the job. And then last but not least, this was also raised by one of our higher education institution representative. It was interesting because this hasn't really brought up at the EU level discussion, is that it actually can also support the knowledge transfer by translating the latest research results quickly into learning opportunities. We know that most of the new jobs require high-level skills, and the higher education has a crucial role to play there. So whether the microcredentials are actually a way to also respond to this very quick need to respond to the labor market needs is a very good question. Next slide, please. But the question is how to build trust and value. And here we, of course, end up discussing about already existing tools and frameworks we are using within the higher education sector. And we talk about the Bologna process, we talk about the Bologna tools already used. And the micropole project looks exactly into these questions. It looks how the quality assurance mechanisms, how the recognition mechanisms that were already referred earlier, or how the qualification frameworks and ECTS are to be used, are available for the micro-credentials. The work is still going on, but and there will be some kind of outputs also for the Commission to look into when drafting their recommendations. But the process will actually also propose its own recommendation. At the moment, I could say it looks like that the tools available are something that can be also used for the micro-credentials, but the question is whether there need to be some more adaptation, whether there's a bit more discussion in relation to, for example, I'm leading the qualification framework, how to actually relate the micro-credentials to the national qualification frameworks and to ensure the transparency. Last but not least, I see, Piia, I'm running out of time, is that it's a question of digitalization. Micro-credentials are always linked to digitalization very, very, very strongly. And here, digitalization is a tool and can support that. But we need standardization, interoperability, metadata, and MyData. And if, Piia, you can allow me to respond back to Klara as regards the user-controlled, user-owned, learner-owned micro-credentials. In Finland, we are talking a lot about MyData, and we don't see that degrees would be owned only by institutions. And institutions, of course, but I mean, we already have a national service where you can access your own data and use it for the different purposes. So this is not something that is against of the degrees, but we see that this can be a way to build your own learner path more flexibly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonna. Now we have some time for questions from the audience. How it is, Oscar? Do we have some questions? I have two remarks for Jonna.
Thank you. And at the moment, there are no open questions, and participants are allowed. You are more than welcome to ask questions during the presentations themselves, so you don't have to wait until the presentation is over. But
yes, thank you. Well, that's just fine because now I have the whole time for myself. So first, I would like to talk with you a bit more about your take on the modularization of higher education degrees. We recently wrote a newspaper article to Helsingin Sanomat with the Vice-Rector of University of Helsinki, Hanna Snellman, and we thought in our writing that maybe there would be some space for modularization within the master's phase of the studies, but not right from the beginning, because the way the university degrees are built, there is always a clear logic behind how the studies go on. Do you see the same problems I see in the way if we change the degrees fully to a modular system?
Yes, thank you. This is actually what I also wanted to come back from the point of view of recognition, actually, what Klara said beforehand, because I'm thinking that this relates also to modularization, you know, how you can combine the degree, basically, and how you go forward with it, is that what I have understood from the cooperation with that the institutions have at the moment at the national and at the international level is that actually the micro-credentials that are now offered as, you know, being part of the degree, there has been a huge work behind. So that the teachers, instructors, they have agreed together the learning outcomes. They have agreed together everything before the learning provision is actually offered. So that's why the modularization and the recognition is easy, because it's done together. The work has been done before. So this is something that I wanted to comment, because there might be some misunderstanding about the so-called automatic recognition, what it means. And in the end, we always say in the Finnish context that it's the institutions who did that decide about the recognition. So when it comes to the institutions, the degrees that they award.
Yes.
So this was my point of view on that.
Yes, you're true in that. And I actually predict that we are about to create a third level to our higher education system. And that might consist of the small learning particles or micro-credentials or so on. And I think that this third level might serve the best those lifelong learners still. Not the ones that are in the beginning of accomplishing their first university degree. But as you can hear us now talking, we are at the beginning of this path, and we are now trying to kind of find mutual ways to tackle this. But is there one question now, Oscar?
Not a question, no, it was a comment by Irina. I can read it if you want.
Yeah, please do.
Yes, Irina Pakkanen says that, thank you, Jonna. Your presentation gave a good overview of how the top-down process can actively interact with the expertise of higher education institutions. Our education is based on research, and thus micro-credentials can also strengthen the basic idea on top of the other targets Europe is looking for.
Yes, thank you. And I also like to thank Jonna for coming up with the idea that these micro-credentials are really creative, they are innovative, and I also see possibilities in knowledge export, for example, for each country. We can offer interesting research-based micro-credentials to show that we have interesting degree programs, for example. We can get much more students from abroad by offering interesting kind of snapshots on the degree programs via these micro-credentials or small learning entities. There are so many possibilities. Thank you very much, Jonna, for your presentation. It is now for us time to move on again. And now we invite Frederick de Decker along. He is the head of International Relations Office at his alma mater, Ghent University in Belgium. He participates regularly as an expert in international projects, mainly dealing with internationalization, educational development, qualifications frameworks, and quality assurance. His special interests are the concept of international or intercultural learning outcomes and competencies, micro-credentials, inclusive mobility, and sustainable internationalization. The topic of Frederick's speech is micro-credentials and universities, big opportunities for small volumes of learning. So, Frederick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Piia, for your kind words of introduction, and also thank you, Jonna and Klara, for setting the scene. Perhaps to the short introduction, I can add that just as Jonna, I'm also active as an expert in the Microbol project. So I will refer to this project also a couple of times during my presentation, which for me, I would like to start indeed with referring to the title. I really think that micro-credentials will be a game changer in higher education and will offer us big opportunities in the coming years, opportunities to broaden the scope of what we're doing in higher education and to also cooperate more. But I've also noticed more over the last couple of months in which I've been very much involved in talking about micro-credentials, that there are still some misconceptions. And so to limit the spreading of these misconceptions, I would like to take 1 minute to go into these. So micro-credentials are certainly not micro-credits, because some people think that it's really about offering programs that are very, very leading to less than 1 credit or ECTS credit or something like that. It's not about that. It's a credential. It's both the learning process and the document leading to that we're focusing on. Second, it's not only limited to lifelong learning. As Jonna rightly said, and I will come back to these opportunities later, there are micro-credentials offer many opportunities in the framework of continuous learning or lifelong learning, but there are also a lot of opportunities within the regular scope of what we're doing in higher education as well. And it's also not limited to new forms of learning. So certainly at the beginning of the discussions of micro-credentials, in the heads of many people, it was restricted to e-learning like MOOCs and things like that. And also, but that was stressed by the previous speakers, it is definitely all not something completely new. We can work further on a lot of things that we have been doing over the last decades. And the situation that I'm going to describe starts from this definition of Microbol that looks both at what we as higher education institutions can offer under the umbrella of micro-credentials, but also what we can recognize as a micro-credential, because I think this dual role and dual responsibility, you might say, we have as universities is very important. If we look at the legal context that we have in Flanders, we can offer what we now call credit certificates, but we can also recognize formal learning that has been previously acquired, but also non-formal and informal learning. And I will come back to that in more detail, because these credit certificates are to some extent a kind of modularization or flexibilization of our higher education that we've known since about 15 years, to acknowledge that after an evaluation, a student has proven to master the competences, which you could also call learning outcomes, by the way. So it's a semantic discussion, I'm not going into that. So to master the learning outcomes of a particular course unit. And this acknowledgement is recorded in a document or established by means of an electronic registration. So that means that if a student in our higher education system is successful for one course, that student automatically gets a kind of document or is recorded in an electronic registration to prove that he masters the learning outcomes attached to that course. And this can be used and is used to a very large extent in our system. Thousands of students start, for instance, in one program, in this example, Bachelor in Economical Sciences at Ghent University. They are successful in a number of courses, but not in all. And then they decide to shift to a Bachelor in Business Management at one of our universities of applied sciences. and then get exempted because we recognize that the learning outcomes have already been achieved on the basis of that micro-credential, so this credit certificate. One step further is that we also have similar procedures, not only to recognize what has been achieved in formal education, but also what competences have been achieved through non-formal or informal education. For that, we have legally established procedures at the level of associations, which are universities and universities of applied sciences together. And as a result of that, an applicant can receive a so-called certificate of competency, which is also, and Klara was referring to that in her presentation, which is a kind of micro-credential as the result of non-formal and informal learning, but of course with a type of assessment in between, because you need to state that the level of the learning outcomes, the volume of the learning outcomes, and all these elements that we say are crucial to micro-credential are there. And then these certificates of competencies can also be used in the same way as I described above with the credit certificates to get exemptions of courses, or even if you want for a full degree, because that has happened in the past as well. But this legal framework has been used in a creative way and is being used in a creative way by more and more higher education institutions in Flanders to create what some are now referring to as micro degrees. So what they do is they bring together a number of courses for which you can, if you're successful, receive a credit certificate, and they bundle them together. They put a nice ribbon around it, and they say, well, these courses together have a kind of, they are interconnected, and we offer them together because they have a certain value in the labor market, or they can prove to be useful in terms of upskilling or reskilling. And for instance, the colleagues here in Ghent of the University of Applied Sciences, Hogeschool Ghent, they have a number of micro degrees on offer there. And these can be up to 48 or in this case 48 to 51 ECTS credits. So in that respect, micro is already quite a substantial amount of credits involved there. We have been inspired as Ghent University by these examples, and we will offer the first kind of these micro credentials within our own system from next academic year onwards, in which, for instance, in the Faculty of Arts, a number of courses have been bundled together and will be presented to a broader public in the framework of lifelong learning, because they have a kind of, they are interconnected, and together they can offer possibilities, as I said, for successful candidates to make use of that. What we are also establishing at the moment, and that's a bit of a link to the panel that we will have later this afternoon, is that we want to lower the threshold for students to receive such a certificate of competency to validate their student societal engagement. Or if for the students involved, receiving such a certificate of competency is not so useful because the competences involved are not relevant for the program they take, we will offer them also the possibility to receive a kind of badge for that, and which is a kind of parallel system to support informal learning, parallel to micro-credentials, but which later on can also, if relevant at that moment, facilitate a step to certificates of competency. And so in that respect, we also think that as a university, we need to take on the responsibility to validate this student societal engagement, which can be within the university, but even beyond that, if we think that's relevant. There are many advantages of such a legal framework. For our institutions themselves, it fits with existing practices. It means that we can keep on using the tools that Jonna was also referring to, for instance, developed in ECTS, within qualifications frameworks and so on. And we are familiar with these from, for instance, international student mobility. For the end users, this increased ownership, certainly if they are issued in a digital way. And I think one of the major advantages is that if we achieve in branding this concept of micro-credentials to the broader public, to potential employers, it will certainly increase trust, which is, I think, one of the main challenges now with regard to recognition of all these types of non-formal and informal learning. But also, I don't think we should underestimate the value that micro-credentials can have to increase the potential of use of our existing learning offer. As was already stressed by Jonna, it can enhance flexibility, modularization, although we have to admit that this has its limits, of course, and we still need to be able to offer the full degrees as we've done in the past as well. But also, I think there are content-wise and in the way in which we organize our organizations, our education, a lot of advantages if we use micro-credentials to create more openness towards more diverse learners. For instance, if we can use these micro-credentials in the framework of our lifelong learning, but at the same time being part of our regular programs, that could result in mature students working, experienced students working together with students from different backgrounds, and they can learn a lot. This intergenerational learning, I think, can also be established through this micro-credential and can be very effective. And so this brings me to the last point. The potential for the future is, I think, enormous. And that goes from links, and some of these have been referred to already, with existing instruments and digitalization processes, for instance, within Europass, within the European Student Card Initiative, and so on, to really give ownership of the micro-credential to the end user. That's an essential element there. But also, and today proves this, use the potential of all the attention for micro-credentials in European universities. And there has been a recent paper by ICIU. You are in EC2U now organizing this forum within Enlight, the European University Initiative, in which Ghent University is partner. We will start working on, because we have only started recently. We will start with a micro-credentials working group next week, and I'm glad to see that Brian and perhaps some other colleagues from other Enlight partners are following this forum here today as well, which shows that within European University there is huge leverage to work on this, and within Enlight and also within all these other European universities, we are using this and making sure that we will bring further this concept also within the essence that we are working on. So I thank you for your attention, and I'm of course ready to answer all your questions.
Thank you so much, Frederick. I think that your presentation really nicely gathered up the first two speakers' content. And what about now, Oscar? Do we have questions from the audience?
No questions at this point, no. Okay,
so once again, I of course have prepared a few notions. I really love the idea of co-creating the micro-credentials. Can you please tell us a bit more? Do you have an example, for example, of a course, micro-credential that was co-created, and that's the one that is possibly very popular or excellent in terms of utilizing research knowledge? Or
yes, so one that will kick off next academic year is really, it's called Art in Focus. I hope that's a good translation, where a number of and we have a few very famous art historians working within our Faculty of Arts. They will bring together the latest expertise and jointly offer that to the regular students in our master program and persons interested in this topic from a lifelong learning perspective. And we really hope that these two groups of learners will learn from each other. That's one point, but also that for these lifelong learners, this can offer them either a taste and trigger them to start a food program, or support them in reorienting their own career if they want to. So that's the dual element in that, and it's a concrete example that will be implemented next academic year.
Thank you. That sounds very interesting, and I think that the theoretical concept for this type of learning would be, or teaching even, would be community-based learning. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
That brings together, let's say, a few elements that I think in most of the European university initiatives that we are working on. And that's also indeed this challenge-based learning, this openness to society. And I think micro-credentials is also a very important element in this shift in which we indeed reach out more to the local communities and try to really find solutions for the challenges that they are coping with at the moment. And I think micro-credentials certainly as an interesting way to come up with possibilities to react in a swift way to the upskilling and reskilling needs that we see. It will complement very well, I think, what we are doing in the broader sense in setting up this very strong cooperation with let's say the broader regional atmosphere that we're working in.
Yes, I totally agree. And as we all know, also EC2U is about these communities and collaboration between cities and campuses. So this excellently fits our scope as well. Now do we have something in the chat now, Oscar?
Yes, there was a question about the presentation and if they will be available after today, and Lisa already answered it, but I can also say that yes, the presentations will be available on the Live2 platform for 2 weeks after this.
Yes, thank you so much.
With pleasure.
Perfect. And thank you, Frederick. So we have just now had a wonderful 3 shows about presentations about micro-credentials. And I really like to thank you all, Klara, Jonna, and Frederick, once again for your great input on this matter. And as we heard and talked and discussed, there are a few different perspectives, but I don't think that they disagree with each other. I think that they complement each other. And I think that we will come up with a great kind of European framework for micro-credentials eventually together. You really gave us a lot to think about and a lot to reflect in our discussions. And once again, thank you for your active engagement. And as Oscar already told you, the presentations will be available for 2 weeks on the platform after this forum. And next, we will hear the students' ideas on how we can foster and improve student engagement. But actually, before that, it's time to value our own well-being and add some movement into our day. In the University of Turku, we have a bottoms-up project that aims to get the students and personnel to reduce the time they spend sitting in one place and to actively take breaks from sitting for their own well-being. We have volunteers at the campus who keep small gym sessions for the staff. And our HRD planning officer, Kati Kekäläinen, is one of them, and she will shortly give you some tips. Actually, after the video that is shortly coming, our specialist in academic affairs, Joni Kajander from Student Union of the University of Turku, will host the latter part of the panel discussion. But now, thank you. See you after the panel in the closing of the forum. Here comes the bottoms-up video.
Hello! At the University of Turku, we have had a campaign called Bottoms Up, Sit Less, Feel Better from year 2013. The campaign is targeted for the whole university, both students and staff. Its target have been to get the people to actively take breaks from sitting. Standing up needs to be an acceptable part of lectures and work. The importance of reduction of sitting was informed on the internet and Facebook, on posters and at various events organized by the university and Finnish Student Health Service Turku. Campaign has been considered necessary and it has got a lot of publicity. It has also won the award of the European Network of Academic Sport Services in 2015. Several break exercises have been held during lectures and work days. And now when we are working and studying at home, everyone has a possibility to use the break exercise program Break Pro. Many people have started to think how much they sit, and many have reduced the time spent sitting. Break workout have been considered refreshing and helpful. Now it's time for bottoms up and short exercise break for us too. Please get up and focus on the position you are standing in. Bring your feet hip-width apart, check that your toes are pointing forward and your knees are slightly soft. Relax shoulders down but slightly tense your abs. Next I'll give some tips on breathing directions, but if it feels confusing, forget the whole thing and just breathe smoothly. Breathe in and reach for the sky. Palms come together up and overhead. During exhalation, relax your shoulders. Inhale, slowly lean towards one side. Exhale, come back. Inhale, slowly lean to opposite side. Exhale, come back to the center. Start with smaller movements and feel a nice stretch on your sides. Repeat a couple of times to both sides. Check that you are not leaning forward like this or backward. Now we would like to maintain a straight line, like we are between two walls. Stop in the middle, put your hands down and roll your shoulders. So next one, bend the elbows at a 90 degrees angle so that your upper arms are in straight horizontal line. Inhale and bring the backs of the hands all the way back. Don't do this too hard, but feel a nice stretch in the chest and in front of your shoulders. Exhale, bring the hands in front of you and palms kiss together. Palms do not have to touch each other if it feels impossible. The movement could also be more like this, but feel the strength in your upper back when your arms are in front of you. And repeat. Open your chest and bring your arms in front of you. Keep the 90-degree angle and keep the shoulders down. The movement should not look like this, but this. And 5 times more. Remember to breathe smoothly. And 3, 2, and the last one. And relax your arms. Our last movement is for our back and the back of the legs. I'll turn sideways so you can see better what is going on. Roll down with a round back as slowly as it's possible. And when you come back with rounded back, do it piece by piece, very slowly. And repeat. When you are moving down, your head is moving first, then your shoulders, upper back, and lower back is last. And when you are coming back, first is moving your lower back, then upper back, then shoulders, and the head is the last one. Repeat 2 times, as slowly as possible. And feel a nice stretch in your back and back of your legs. And now we are ready. Now we have done the exercises. I hope you have a more relaxed feeling in both body and mind. Thanks and have a nice day.
Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to the panel section of this program. And first of all, thank you for Klara, Jonna, and Frederick for the excellent presentations. I think it was a really good summary of the discussions we are now having concerning microcredentials in the European higher education area, and hopefully those discussions continue and go forward. And we heard from the perspective of the Commission and the State Ministry here in Finland, and also from the perspective of a higher education institution. Now in this panel, we are taking another perspective on the issue. It's the student engagement perspective. All these maybe higher up institutions service our citizens. In the Finnish University Act, the mission of the universities is to raise aware and critical global citizens, and that's something we all should think about, what the microcredentials and concepts like microcredentials can give us as citizens and learners. I'm Joni Kajander, the specialist for academic affairs in the student union here in the University of Turku, and talking with me today on these topics here in the panel are Miguel Sanchez from Piia, from Salamanca, and Ville Jäppinen from the National Union of University Students in Finland. Here I could give the voice to Miguel and Ville to introduce yourselves.
Well, hello everyone. I'm Miguel. I'm from Salamanca, and it's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
And hello, my name is Ville Jäppinen, and I'm the board member of National Union of Students in Finland, and it's nice to be here today.
And so for the panel, we are going to talk about roughly in half an hour here on a couple of topics, and then there's also the chat. So please, you in the audience, give your ideas and questions also in the chat, and we have Oscar there to highlight issues from the chat and questions. But yeah, as I talked, the perspective that we are talking here is more with the learners, how it will be useful, how this microcredentials or this approach is actually taking us forward as learners. And here the first topic that I thought to ask from you, Miguel and Ville, was concerning how student activities could be better recognized as competencies, maybe through this kind of approach. And here to give background, I was thinking like students engage in many different activities during their studies. Beside their studies, they are active in associations, they are active in voluntary work, they are working. How could maybe these kinds of competencies be better recognized through maybe micro-credentials. What are your thoughts about this? Maybe Ville can go first.
Yeah, I can go first. Well, thank you about this question. I think it's really important. I think that the most effective way to recognize this kind of extracurricular activities is to make sure that the degrees have like enough flexibility to do this kind of recognition. These activities are also important because a student can I lost the word apply what has been learned and gain experience for example social influencing or politics in society wider. So that's the reason we need to consider how to really get recognized these. And what comes to the micro credentials, yeah, I see that they can be like a tool for this recognition, but it needs to be ensured that these credentials will also be added to the degree as ECTs, because if we see micro credentials as badge of, for example, something like student politics or something like that, it's not the right direction, because there's a risk that these activities are not recognized then as part of degree, but an extra work that will be like additional to everything else, and the student really doesn't gain anything from participation. And that's the reason why I see that the most important thing to do first is ensure that the programs are flexible enough, and we have multiple ways to recognize these and take them as a part of degree studies, for example, in minor studies.
Yeah, good perspective. I especially liked how you talked about that the degrees have to be flexible enough to also take these maybe micro credentials or these kind of competencies that you can have outside of the sort of formal education, so that there has to be sort of idea and room for these kinds of competencies in the degrees. What about Mikael? What kind of ideas this subject brings to mind?
Yes, well, I agree with the idea that was mentioned just now. And also, I would like to add the fact that not every single activity should be included in this whole micro credential systems or any recognition system, because not all of them can be applied to this specialization and learning process that involves your future working sphere. So like yeah, I think that there should be like it should be stated what kind of activities or the must-haves that the activity has to offer to the students, so that it can be credited via micro-credentials or whatever the system. Because if it's not defined at first, I think there's going to be not there's going to be a lot of work of having to start to draw the line between what's useful and can be credited for and what's not.
Yeah, and that's I think also really important, and stresses also the idea that it has to be planned also from the part of the higher education institutions, that what kind of competencies are like the in the core of the degrees, and maybe when you have different kind of competencies as a learner from different like participating activities, also maybe prior learning learning qualifications, and then you can apply maybe some of those in those degrees. But yeah, one thing that we heard from the discussions earlier was the sort of perspective that Commission and ministries are talking about this, and university alliances are talking about what the micro-credentials are and what we are doing with them. And I think it's important. We have to have that discussions, and it's in the center of academic life to define terms, what is a micro-credential and so on. But with you, I would like to discuss a little bit like how can we as students engage and influence the planning and supply of teams offered as micro-credentials, because there's lots of talk about how, for example, work-life competencies should be taken into consideration in the micro-credentials, how they should sort of implement needs in the work life. But then I always see students and also universities in general places and actors that bring new ideas, something that we don't have in the working life. And sort of I want to see that kind of ideas also represented in the micro-credentials. One example for me came to mind from the sustainable development and climate actions, where at least in Finland, the students have been active many years before many of the disciplines have sort of started to recognize in the curricula that actually we need in the future these competencies, skills concerning sustainable development. But what do you think? How should we get to engage and sort of give our ideas as learners? What should we learn? Maybe a hard question, but Miguel, what are your thoughts?
Sure. Well, based on the previous idea that I just exposed, I think that just like some companies offer, like private companies not related to the university, offer extra curriculum practices. As students, we have a lot of organizations that are involved in these university matters, and those organizations, if aligned, is like if it is strictly defined what can be conceived as a micro-credential, as the students, as yes, as another organization, just like any other, we could offer in a formal way these suggestions of different activities and things to be conceived as micro-credentials, because in the end, we probably have a different perspective than the people who offer them normally. So I think it's important, the involvement of the students, and that their opinions are taken in mind when working on this production of micro-credentials.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent idea that student organizations by themselves can be also as providers of what kind of micro-credentials should be in supply. What about Ville?
Yeah, I just would like to add on what Mikael just said, that it's also important to recognize these kind of activities, because many of students they make like a significant part of the higher education institutions' social interactions, and so the teaching students to help active like increase the importance of the education in society, and it's important that the higher education institutions they recognize these, but they also make it possible for students to do this kind of interaction. And I think that Michael said it really well. What comes to the like quality and no quality assurance, like the planning part of this thing, I think that the whole idea of like university degree, it should always look in the future, and degree should be designed to meet both the labor market needs and the future social societal challenges, like in the society wider. And the education should also be based on the highest and the most recent scientific knowledge. And as you said earlier in the description of the question, you mentioned the climate and sustainability, and I think that these also need to consider as the future challenges that the degrees must be planned to respond. But what comes to the micro-credentials, if they are part of complete degrees, just offered like in the separate parts, they have the same quality requirements as the degree studies in the wider concept. So I mean that they need to also be like planned in the same mind as the degree studies are, and they need to depend also on the latest and the highest research that is required from the like the degree studies. As in the context of Finland, for example, the students take part in the planning of degree studies, and I think that in the best way to make sure that students have the possibility to influence on the studies is also in the micro-credentials, and in this kind of ways is also get students involved in the planning of the degrees. And yeah, but as mentioned earlier in the Jonna's speech, if the micro-credentials are not part of the degrees, it's the question about participation is much more complex, and I'm not sure how like students can really take part in the planning if it's something that's not part of like the degree. And it's a question that I don't really know the answer, but maybe it is much simpler than I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, that's an excellent perspective, because we are of course here talking from the sort of formal degree student perspective, but then when we think about micro-credentials and a lot of the talk in the earlier presentations, it's like all the citizens, we are all learners here, and the lifelong learning is much a wider thing, and it should also benefit the whole society, not just students, but there the participation and engagement with all the learners is maybe a daunting task, but maybe we should try to also find solutions there. And maybe that's also something where actually when we think about EC2U as a alliance of city universities closely working with cities, the cities face the same problems with participating the citizens in all kinds of activities, starting from participating in the governance of the city. So maybe there's also common ground in the future concerning lifelong learning with the cities, communes to also involve citizens to engage in what learning and micro-credentials or other elements we provide. But yeah, actually one one thing, and Oscar can maybe, if there's something to highlight from the chat, yeah, maybe you can hear if there is anything you want to highlight there.
Yeah, thank you, Joni. There has actually been a bit of discussion here in the chat. First of all, Piia, Björn wanted to comment here in the chat that student voice is really important when we try to find the most suitable place for small learning modules and micro-credentials, and is asking to please always feel free to contact her directly when we do our related work with the EC2U, and of course we will listen to you when we decide upon micro-credentials that will be provided. Then Brian here was asking a question, and I think this could be an interesting discussion. Assigning credit to extracurricular activities leads to the problem of what is actually being recognized, the participation or the learning. If the learning, then it has to be assessed, and if the participation, then could that perhaps lead to volunteering for credit?
Yeah, I can maybe also answer myself, but first, what are your thoughts, Mikael and Ville, on this one?
I understand the point of view, and I go back to my first argument of it really needs to be defined what can and cannot be and how it has to work, because it's what he just said. Like, what is the thing that it's evaluated, the participation or the learning, and how are you going to do it? So yeah, I think that's quite a lot of work that has to be done before actually setting the whole micro credentials thing.
Yeah. And Ville.
Yeah, this is a great question, and well, it's a bit complicated if we see. And I understand the thought behind it, but how I see is, and how I see in the context of Finland, it is also important that the higher education institutions will reward students for like active citizenship by recognizing these kinds of skills they apply in the extracurricular activities, and I think the ECTs are the right way to recognize these, because they also set the signal that participation in society is also important and appreciated, and also students take part in the context of university, for example, in the governance or something like that, and they also can acquire certain amounts of credits from that kind of work. And I'm not sure that it's something that we can put like a learning description that you have made all these kind of well, qualifications, but it's more like something that we can't really measure, but we know it happens all the time when students participate in the society or university. But yeah, I don't have this better answer to this question.
That was a good answer to the question, and maybe I will add to Mikael's answer. I think it's important to define them, and it is something that higher education institutions must also regard as not something that is automatic or something that doesn't require their active involvement in the recognition of the competencies. I think it is something that actually we need the higher education institutions competencies and experts on how to acknowledge and take into consideration those competencies that students have maybe gained through societal activities or other activities. It is something that must be the sort of in the core of the expertise of the higher education institutions, that what's the actual competencies. that have been gained. What's the learning there? Yeah. Then to close off, I would like to talk still a little bit how we engage in work life. I talked briefly, like there are many things discussed here concerning micro-credentials, about the needs from wider society concerning future work-life competencies, but then actually something that we as students, we are already in the work life in many ways, or participate in the work life, and I would like to hear from your ideas, like how should we engage the work life? Here my backdrop is that most of the students in Finland are already working beside their studies or during their studies. So what do you think? Should we have more ways to maybe recognize that all the learning that is happening when students engage work life? Maybe Ville can start with this one.
Yeah, so the same, because Mikael started the last one. Well, I think that in the case of Finland, there are research results that show that this model of our studies, where working life is included in studies, for example, internships or something like that, it promotes the employment after graduation, and it's a good way to get students involved in the labor market during their studies. So the examples given in your question are like in the realized in the time in Finland, and most of the students have at least some kind of experience on the working life during their studies. Also, although it depends on the field and the university which they are studying, how much that relevant know-how they will have. But I think that the most significant concern in this is how working during their studies is affecting the well-being of the students and the process of their studies. Because there are some challenges which has also been shown in the latest Eurostudent research, that the working longer hours per week alongside studies, it can potentially become problematic in various aspects. It can, for example, be an obstacle for students' mobility in abroad, for example, and it's also a risk factor for successful and continuous engagement in the studies, and it can also even be a reason to interrupt one's studies. So these are like the concerns that are the biggest in the civil point of view, this kind of working during the studies. Yeah.
I could maybe there add briefly, like that there's also the problem that now much of that work isn't recognized in any way in the degree or in the studies, so that makes them sort of like they are not sort of helping each other. They are sort of putting more pressure on the students, and maybe I'm thinking a little bit that could that be changed. But Miguel, what's your point on this students working and getting competencies from work life?
Yeah, I don't think I really get what's the subject to discuss about, but from my perspective of what happens here in Spain, well, first of all, I don't think there are any possibilities of working in any area that involves the things that you study. And also, it's obviously a tool that, like, to have an income while you study. It's a necessary tool in many situations, because some students need that extra income so that they can finance their studies. However, I don't think that these two worlds should get mixed, in the sense of life is about priorities, and if you cannot deal with your work schedules and your study schedules, maybe you have to change something. It's what I said. I don't think I don't know if this is the subject that we're trying to get to or not, but I believe that even if any student gets any job at any university wise, anything related to the university, that he should get any extra help, like official extra help, because they are working. Obviously, people are people, and they are concerned about each other's situations, and they can make exceptions and favors to those students who work. And in that sense, I've seen it many times that teachers and everyone is really concerned about those students, and they really help each other. But it's what I mentioned, there are no official aids to those students. I don't know if it's
like I told you before the panel in messages, that there are no right or wrong answers here, and it's maybe something that we need to try to look for the ways for students to engage in different ways. Is it internships? Is it maybe micro credentials, working together with work life, or other means? One thing that I know, that in some disciplines in Finland there has been practices where summer jobs can be, for example, recognized and credited by the discipline in their degrees, but there has to be, of course, again, the recognition, like we talked earlier, that there has been some maybe more general competencies that the students have gained during their summer jobs. But yeah, thank you. We are almost out of time now, actually rather well on time. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Thank you so much for giving your thoughts on these matters, and I think we had quite good perspectives to add to the earlier discussions, and hopefully this topic in general is something that we will engage as the EC2U Alliance as we go forward. Yeah, thank you so much, Ville and Miguel. And Miguel, we are happy to see you hopefully in autumn and in Salamanca, and we will probably now go forward to the next part of the program. Thank you all.
Thank you.